Ms. Underhill?
Here.
Mayor Hardy?
Here.
Thank you, council.
I just found out today Mr. Snyder's electronic, so we need to do his motion, please. Someone have a motion for him to participate electronically?
Mr. Snyder, can you identify your location and reason for your absence?
Sure, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on a family matter. Thank you.
I move that City Council approve electronic participation by David Snyder in this meeting for personal reasons pursuant to the City Council's adopted policy.
Second. Mrs. Scott on the second.
All right, for the roll call, Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Ms. Flynn?
Yes.
Ms. Leon? Yes. Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Ms. Underhill?
Yes.
Mayor Hardy?
Yes.
Thank you, that passes.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, Dave. So we've got a couple work session items. Look like it's a pretty light night, hopefully. Famous last words. Wyatt, take it away.
Well, thank you, Mayor Hardy, members of council. Our first item up is an ordinance to authorize the city manager to provide monetary bonuses to employees. Andy and Jenny have been working this together. I might turn it over to Andy first, just to walk through some of the practical applications we've been running into as we're trying to recruit staff to the city, and this would be helpful with us to maintain competitiveness in the market. And so Andy, let me turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Wyatt. Mayor, members of council, it's good to see you all this evening. So as kind of Wyatt led off, as we've been working through some discussions on how to help, in particular, Public Works, but some of our other departments fill kind of hard to fill positions. We've, come across some potential tools to help, but one of the things we've run into is that the city manager, the city staff doesn't have an ordinance from council to allow them to use some of these tools. So we want to kind of start the discussion with you all tonight on what that ordinance would look like, and some of the things that that we're thinking about using the ordinance for. So that's a little background of why we're here. But so the city manager is requesting authorization to establish bonus programs to address a variety of needs, including recruitment, retention, and performance. Bonuses may be provided to employees in accordance with applicable administrative directives and guidelines. And a bonus shall be defined as a lump sum payment to an employee that is not part of their base salary. So several of the bonuses that under consideration for implementation that we've been talking about are hiring and retention bonuses for individuals in difficult or to fill and or critical positions for city operations. A yearly retention bonus for employees that are required to maintain a commercial driver's license in good standing. So this is a key operational requirement for our Public Works operations to drive, some of the city vehicles. And having a commercial driver's license is a competitive field for us to kind of be operating in. So some of our positions have been harder to fill because of that requirement. A referral bonus to encourage employees, to recommend Falls Church as an employer and help with our overall candidate pool. And then finally, a bonus for our Employee of the Year, which recognizes outstanding individual accomplishments or achievements in advancing and improving public service in the city of Falls Church. So this stems from an authority in the Virginia Code, which states, notwithstanding any contrary provision of law, general or special, the governing body of any locality may provide for payment of monetary bonuses to its officers and employees. The payment of a bonus shall be authorized by ordinance. So we have several existing administrative regulations that reference bonuses. So a performance award program, a referral bonus program, and the Employee of the Year. As you all know, we're undergoing a review of all of our administrative regulations right now, and we'll review these as part of that process and clarify any kind of details associated with any bonuses we would intend to use going forward. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. We're happy to kind of take any feedback or answer any questions you all have.
Great. Thanks, Andy. Questions or feedback for staff? Caroline?
I just want to clarify. So these programs exist, but there's no city council ordinance to say that they should exist? Some of them are dated like 2018 and 2007.
Yeah, so the administrative regulations that are attached, those are current administrative regulations. And the second part was, I'm sorry, I lost that part.
So they're administrative regulations.
Yes.
They've never before been a council ordinance.
That's right. So,
That is correct. And the reason we're doing this is just to make it more official, Or was there a change in state
So
law?
we have been informed through the years, we don't do a lot of bonuses now. We've had this AR on the books for a long time. But as I think Andy was working with Public Works on some of these retention and hiring issues, Finance alerted us to this state code provision that says if you're going to do a bonus, you need a council ordinance. So that old AR, we think, was done out of compliance with state law. We don't know exactly what the state law was at that time, but that's what we think happened.
And I think any bonuses that we did do were part of the budget ordinance that we did on an annual basis.
That's
So I think covered in that respect. However, I believe that the city attorney would agree with us that this is a cleaner way of doing it.
So,
That's a better answer, what
There you go.
she said.
so just one request, and that, as I read through these, I'm hoping you could change the language to be more inclusive because it refers to he many times.
Oh, so in the administrative regulations?
In the administrative regulations, it refers to he, but not she.
Correct. So that would be part of the adjustment that all of the ARs are going through is to have more inclusive language.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then there's also just a typo in the first one. It says
Yeah, I think there is.
do, it says do instead of does. In
In the performance award?
812, yeah, performance award in that top first paragraph underneath 3. That's just a little typo, but I mean, I think,
Yes, and to review for grammar and typos as
so
well.
that will be happening after we pass the ordinance?
So that's.
What's the order of things
So
here?
the ARs are being reviewed right now, kind of started this winter and they're working through them. I don't know when this one specifically is up for being renewed in our queue.
Let's see, performance award, then the referral, and
So-
then employee of the year. I don't know where they are in the queue, and they might be also as part of the whole compensation package.
So the administrative regulations were provided in this package as examples. They're not actually, administrative regulations, I don't believe, come to council for approval,
Correct.
if that helps.
So this, within a year's time, these administrative regulations will have been replaced.
So then when will we be able to start implementing bonuses and performance awards? Immediately or not until after the ARs are replaced?
So that's a good question. Have you thought that?
Well, I would say any kind of bonuses that we have or are intending to complete we would be able to do them once council voted on the ordinance and adopted it. I would say in terms of the current ARs that are on the books, I think we would evaluate them as to whether we would currently use them until they have been updated. So some of them, the ones that were listed, the CDL and the hiring and retention bonuses, like those might be implemented right away in order to assist with our recruitment and hiring practices. The referral bonus for city employees, I believe we still implement that. I haven't heard of it been recently implemented, but, and then Employee of the Year happens every year. So that one has been done every year. So it will be a little bit of a variety. I'm sorry, did I cut you off? As to how it goes through. And then as we hire a new HR director and that person comes on board and looking at the ARs, taking a look at compensation as a whole and what we need to look towards in order to provide for both current employees and future employees when it comes to bonuses so we can attract them and retain them.
And to add to what you're saying, this ordinance does only authorize the AR to be developed as the manager would see fit. So there is, unless there is an AR that spells out the bonus practice, nothing could happen immediately. without the AR in
Yeah.
place, right? So,
The number one under the ordinance is, the city manager is authorized to establish one or more monetary bonus programs within the AR. So we'd have to have an AR in order to administer a any type of bonus program. We couldn't just give out bonuses without the ARs.
And there's a very specific process for adopting new ARs. They're
Yes.
spelled out in the city code. The manager's authorized to do it, but there has to be an internal process and given to employees for 30-day comment period before it gets executed. So it's a very specific process that would unfold if there's not an existing AR.
Caroline?
I think for me, if we were gonna come to vote on this, I would ask for a couple of things. Let's see. I think we need to define what hard to fill position means. I know that you did the same.
Can you use your microphone? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oops, so sorry.
That's okay.
Thought it was on, but it wasn't. So,
There we go.
thank you. I can hear myself. So if there's, can you please, I do think that there's benefit in that first bullet to clarify what hard to fill means and what that definition is, especially when you're talking about a policy. I think it's great that you give examples, but I think for the employees who read that policy, I think they could benefit from the clarity of it so there's not grievances. I think we want to reduce the number of grievances for lack of clarity of the policy. I also would like to know, for the amounts that are involved in this, did you benchmark it? If the intention is to be competitive and retain, are we truly at the right number for each of these types of bonuses? Because they seem a little low, but that's just me.
So I think we would, right? Like, so the one we've had the most discussion with is the commercial driver's license bonus. And so the majority of jurisdictions here in Northern Virginia are offering this to their employees to retain them so they don't come work for places like us. So we have some numbers from what those jurisdictions have been doing, and we would intend to match that at the very least in order to stay competitive.
Yeah, I think before this comes to vote, just litmus check that and make sure that the intention and the spirit of this ordinance is truly competitive with, what the jurisdictions are offering. So either match it or go over it by a little bit, if that makes sense, just in the spirit of being as effective as possible, right? For the CDL, we are reimbursing the cost of that certification, right? So employees can expense that back, separate from the bonus.
We've offered our employees that training, yes. So we're not asking employees to go out and pay for that themselves, right?
Because that's in the thousands to actually get certified, but then to maintain it, there's also renewal costs. Do we pay for that expense separate from from the bonus?
That I don't know. I don't know if Zach's online.
Yes, good evening. We do reimburse for the CDL for all of our staff to maintain that.
Okay.
Thank you,
That's
Zach.
good and kind. That works. And then when I take a look at what we're trying, okay, so in TO 24-13, we cite hiring and retention, yearly retention, 3 referral bonus, 4 employee of the year. When I trace it back to the attachments, I see performance, referral, and employee of the year. So where does the performance policy map to? Is performance equal to
So those
hiring, retention? Just make sure the words line up with the AR.
yes. So those administrative regulations are the ones that exist today that reference bonuses. They were only intended to be provided as examples
Okay.
of what the city could, the city manager, the
Got
city
it.
staff could implement.
So when it comes back to council as an ordinance to vote, I would just recommend that we align or, some of those ARs to what we're calling them, because I'm hearing 4 bullets. Hiring, retention, what does that map to in AR? 2, yearly retention, what does that map to in the AR? 3, referral, where does that map to in the AR? And then bonus for employee of the year.
So to clarify, does council have a role in approving ARs?
No.
So these ARs are just what's on the books today.
So it's an FYI. It's
Yes.
It's
That's
just
right.
okay.
The actual,
Correct.
unless I'm misunderstanding the
Because they're
process.
attached, so I
Ye-
got confused as to.
Yeah, unless I'm misunderstanding the process, the ordinance itself is this piece,
The TO
At the top?
24-13.
Yeah.
lines worth.
Yeah.
not this is the staff report. So, unless I'm not reading.
To try to clarify, we established,
I'm with you,
this
Mary Beth.
ordinance asks Wyatt to create ARs that create the programs. We
Yes.
have some programs on the books already in the form of
Correct.
these ARs. Those ARs will get updated once we give Wyatt this authority.
Yes. Under the ordinance, there are 3 in that first number 1, line 59, and then line 61. It does say recruitment, retention, and performance as sort of a general overview.
Okay.
Yeah. On the staff report, those bullets were just examples of what we would be considering as a city, and some of them happen to be current administrative regulations. Okay, does that make sense?
Aaron?
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna come at this similar place from Caroline, which is regardless of the ARs. I guess where I'm coming from is my support for the ordinance is premised on having ARs that make clear to employees the criteria for an award, the discretion provided to whom, and that it's kind of a transparent, equitable, fair process, that we don't end up in sort of a situation where people feel that there's preferences or favoritism, or that certain departments, because those department directors may advocate more effectively or view work as, being bonus worthy, whereas other people, maybe a director that's like a stickler and you're doing your work and you're performing really well, but I don't view that as something that should be subject to a bonus, that there is kind of a overall organizational kind of baseline for the sorts of things that would prompt, a bonus in terms of a retention bonus or performance bonus. And as Caroline said, the kind of positions that may be the ones where we're directing this sort of funding, or if it's just an overall organizational shift toward you get a special act award because you went above and beyond in this project, and that it's work oriented, and that it's not necessarily like outcome oriented for when you may be recognizing employees for certain, performance. On the CDLs, it seems to make sense if it's a retention issue, so long as we're, helping people achieve that and paying for that, and, reimbursing for actually keeping the license. If this is something, I guess, the private sector is doing, then I suppose it makes sense to me. Like the sort of paying for the continued licensure you would need would seem to motivate the person to keep the licensure. But if you need to do more than that, I guess it makes sense. And then on the referral bonuses, my only word of caution, right, is that when HR does seek to increase a candidate pool, that it's doing through multiple mechanisms, so that you don't end up with a referral bonus program that like potentially prompts some sort of, disparate impact employment case where, people say, well, all the people in this position or department are men, and the men are referring, other men because they're friends with these other people, and it turns out that, you're having a disparate impact based on sex, because then you actually don't have many women in your applicant pool. So long as in kind of reinforcing the referral bonus program, we're doing so in a way that is also reinforcing our non-discrimination policies, and it's only one tool among many where we're, seeking to kind of, use multiple means of reaching people in order to increase candidate pools generally, then it seems, like I said, just, you know, one of a number of things that we can be doing. I think that's, oh, and that on the referral, in the AR, it wasn't clear to me when we say that the person who's getting the referral bonus isn't a selecting official. For me, I would think that the person isn't involved at all on the hiring committee, and that you would have a, like, referral blind process for the hiring committee, so to speak, so that only HR, like, knows who would get a referral bonus until the point that you would actually hire a person, and then you would get, like, the bonus would kick in, that the bonus is completely divorced from the selection process. It's just there at the application period, and it's generated at the selection period should the person be selected. And then my one other note, as I actually thought about it, on the performance sort of special act type awards, I know it says in the AR there's an annual review, but depending on, like, if you set a pot of money up front, like, should it be quarterly submissions, and you decide, okay, out of this group of quarterly submissions, here's who we're going to recognize, or we're going to recognize all of these people, and we may need to recalibrate sort of at the 6-month period or the 9-month period, so that if you're late in the cycle, you don't end up, like, without a special act award for doing something above and beyond that's conceivably better than the people who were awarded earlier in the cycle, if that makes sense. So just think about whether a 12-month list versus a quarterly list or a 6-month list makes sense. That's it.
Other questions or comments? Justine?
So I just wanted to clarify some of the questions from before. So the ARs that were included in this packet are the only ARs that we have related to bonuses right now. Is that correct, or are there other ones that weren't included in the packet?
So I believe these are the only ones we could find.
Okay, perfect. That's okay. So related to the CDL, there isn't currently an AR, at least from the ARs that I was looking through, that would give a bonus for a CDL.
That's correct.
That's correct, okay. So of those 4 things that were mentioned in the packet, we would create the CDL AR, we'd create other ARs related to this. Okay, thank you. And then I guess my final question is about the fiscal impact at the bottom. It says these individual bonus programs will be enacted only when sufficient funds are available within previously approved budget allocations. I guess we already do allocate money for the Employee of the Year award. Do we have a sense as to how these programs would be structured such that funds are allocated for them? Would we generally allocate funds for them every single year? Or is that so far down the line, we haven't even gotten to that point yet?
So I think before we would implement a program, we would have to ensure that we've, identified the resources either within the budget that you all have already approved, or we would have to come back for a budget amendment or talk about it in a future fiscal year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I'm going to tag on to that, because that was actually my question is, it'd be nice historically to know how much out of our salary and benefits budget we've allocated towards bonuses, so we know historically how often it's been used, and then with these changes, what the expected usage might look like, so we can kind of understand the scale, like, oh, this is going to be 2x what we've historically spent, just to give us a sense of, like, how big of this might be. Because if this is a need, I think it's something that's worth council discussion, that maybe we don't need to stick within our amount because we really think CDLs are really critical and we really need to allocate additional funds. I think that's a worthwhile conversation to have with us. So, but historical just would be a good context for us to know, like, do we allocate 1,000, 10,000, 50,000? If we have that data, that would be helpful.
So we'll take that back, see what we can dig up from a historical data perspective. I think going forward, we haven't designed all of these programs yet, and I think, Councilmember Flynn mentioned a number of kind of thoughtful comments on how to design these, and it's really important to set them up correctly. I don't know that, in the next, kind of in the timeline that we were talking about for this ordinance, that we would be coming back with cost estimates for all those programs at this stage. So I don't know if that lines up with what you were asking for, Mayor.
Rough idea would be great, or, you know, even say, we'll come back to you once we have these programs fleshed out, and we think it'll be around this much. I think it'd be helpful.
Okay.
And for context, I mean, just sort of verbally, we will give you the actual numbers, but in kind of my recollection, I don't think we've done any bonuses for a decade other than Employee of the Year. And it's largely out of the experience that we had as an organization about some of these equity issues and the fairness of administration across different departments. So that's where we are today. And so we are taking a look at this, and it's really kind of been driven by the reasons we articulated at the beginning. But we also know that as we have this discussion, it opens up other discussions that you need to have. And I think the pay and compensation administrative regulation is one of the big ones that we're tackling, and this will be part of that discussion.
And while we don't have an official role in approving ARs, I think keeping GovOps updated on how the ARs are going would probably be the appropriate place to do it. Okay, other final thoughts on this one? Great. Thanks for bringing this forward. I think in general, I think we support the idea of rewarding employees and retaining and hiring, and we want to support those hard-to-fill positions. And I think we generally look to staff like HR and legal professionals to figure out the most equitable way to implement the programs, right? Like, we can't be in all the details with you guys, and so we're looking to you all to help us figure out how to do this well. So thank you for bringing this forward to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, up next, stormwater.
All right, we are bringing to council an ordinance to update the city's stormwater codes. This is a work session discussion and a request that this be scheduled for first reading on July 22nd, 2024. And I think I'll turn it over straight to Zach for the briefing. This is being led by our Department of Public Works, Zach Bradley, Director, and Bahilu Kaifel, our Senior Stormwater and Sanitary Sewer Engineer, has done the heavy lifting on this. Zach, I don't know if you wanted to make any introductory comments, or do we turn it over directly to Mr. Kaifel?
I'll make a couple just quick introductory comments as I attempt to turn my camera on for everybody. Good evening. So just a very quick synopsis. These changes are coming to tonight's work session. They are state changes that we are required to kind of mimic and update our code to. What we have tonight are the minimum requirements to be in compliance with state code. If council has questions about kind of above and beyond higher standards, we can investigate that further prior to bringing this back to council to the next meeting. But I do just want to note for council that these are the minimums of what we need to adopt. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Bahilu Kaifel for the presentation.
Thank you, Zach. Good evening, Mayor Letty Hardy and the council member and the city manager White. Good evening. Recently, DEQ, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, consolidated the existing stormwater management regulation and the existing erosion and sediment control, and also the sediment control, erosion sediment control and stormwater management certification into one consolidated regulations. The consolidated regulations is a Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Regulation, which contains both technical standard from erosion and sediment control and stormwater management. So the goal of consolidating the two regulations primarily to reduce confusion, and there was a lot of redundancies and conflict between the two closely associated sets of regulations. So previously there was two separate programs, Virginia Erosion Sediment Control Program and the Virginia Stormwater Management Program. They were two separate, but moving forward there will be only one program for both. So DEQ provided a guidance for local programs administrators, they included a model ordinance. They released this model ordinance back in December 2023. Based on the model ordinance, there is no substantial change. There is some basic updates, but in terms of the stormwater technical erosion sediment control measures, they remain the same. Some of the basic updates in the new regulation, previously the stormwater, if we issue a permit, it was a stormwater management permit, but moving forward, the stormwater management permit is replaced by Virginia Erosion and Stormwater Management Permit in the new consolidated regulations. So during consolidation, we added 9 new definitions. We modified 11 other definitions, and a total of 24 definitions were updated, relocated, and added. So also staff is seeking a flexibility built into the new ordinance. This is basically, we are in the new regulation, we are referencing the stormwater quality, quantity requirement instead of writing the actual code into our ordinance. One of the reasons is this is the first time DEQ was consolidated. This is the initial process. So in the future, they will be updating other materials in their code. So instead of coming back and update our code, we have a flexibility put in our new ordinance. Instead of writing the code directly, we reference it to DEQ. And the recent change we will see in the coming months or years is changing the water quality requirement from 0.1 phosphorus per acre per year to 0.26. So this will be included in the new ordinance. So instead of modifying, we reference those code directly from DEQ. In addition to basic updates, the city storm water ordinance mentioned above, the city required to include 2 additional regulatory standards to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area, which provides a higher standard than the existing ordinance. One of the requirement, one of the mandatory updates that DEQ requested us is addition of more requirement to prevent removal of vegetation in the resource protection area. Just to define a resource protection area means a component of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area that consists of sensitive land that have an intrinsic water quality value due to ecological and biological processes they perform or are sensitive to impact, which may result in significant degradation to the quality of state water. This is directly from the existing stormwater code. So RPA is a 100-foot buffer area in both sides of the stream bank. So requirement of any land disturbance in the RPA require a water quality impact assessment. The seaward 50 feet, if there is any land disturbance in the seaward 50 feet, Planning Commission need to involve for approval. 50 feet landward, it's approved by DPW director. So redevelopment activities in RPA is allowed as long as they submit a water quality impact assessment that shows the impact of the development and the mitigation plan associated with the development. So just a snapshot of the location of the RPA in the city. So those bubbles circled in cyan color, those are the location of the RPA. And the well, I snapshot a big picture on the top that shows 100 feet on both sides of the stream. So that is the RPA location in the city of Falls Church. If you go down, please. So under the new regulation, most of the updates are concerning regarding trees. So mature trees shall be preserved and trimmed or pruned instead of removal. So in the existing one, we allow removal of trees based on the water quality impact assessment they submit, but this is restricting removal of trees. In terms of any mature trees removal should be limited to fewest number of trees feasible. When mature trees are removed to provide sightline and vista, they should be replaced with trees that give equivalent buffer function. This will include inclusion of native species in tree replanting is preferred. So the benefits of allowing more standard in the RPA is it will give well-managed resource protection areas. It play a vital role in maintaining clean water and flood control. It will filter pollution, reduce runoff. That is the purpose of the buffer areas. So the second one, DEQ is asking the city to update is addition of climate change and sea level rise impact assessment in the RPA. So existing code require water quality impact assessment, and the new code is requiring to add the climate change and sea level impact assessment. So all of this is in resource protection area. So such assessment shall be on the resource protection area as delineated the time of proposed land development. Such assessment shall at a minimum be based upon a potential impact of 30 years, since most of the single family house, their lifespan projection is 30 years, and also utilize a model or forecast developed by or on behalf of Commonwealth. The identification of potential impact from 3 studies identified by DEQ, projected sea level rise, storm surge studies, and flooding studies that DEQ included. So Virginia Department of Environmental Quality provided a resource called Adaptive VA. It's a short for Adapt Virginia. That resource is utilized by localities, engineers to see the impact of those 3 studies. So based on our conclusion, the first 2 doesn't impact the city except the third one, which is the flood study. So whenever we have a development in the city, they have to go to these tools and check if the development is impacted by the flood, especially if it is in flood hazard zone. Can you go down, please? So there are 2 flood areas in the city along Trips Run and 4 Miles Run, especially the flood zone AE and flood zone AE in the floodway, which is in a high special flood hazard area. There is also orange colored flood zone X. It's not in the special flood hazard area, but it is in the moderate to low risk area. So any development in those areas should be assessed for impact of flood. Can you go down, please? So once assessment is the impact of the development in the RPA is assessed using the tools provided by DEQ, the developer identified any conditions, alteration, or adaptation measures that need to be proposed with the development to mitigate the impact of flooding in the RPA or the impact of development on the RPA. So based on that alteration, adaptation measures submitted by the development community, DPW director will assess the submitted condition, alteration, and maybe require more conditions, alteration submitted by the engineer. So while the above two requirements are required from DEQ, we are asking council to consider two additional updates proposed by the city. The next two update is not required by DEQ, but we think it's based for the city moving forward if we update those two additional ordinance in the new code. So the first one is changing of treatment of land disturbance activities involving a single family house. Currently, we are treating a single family development as a new development, even though there is already existing in previous area. We are the only jurisdiction in the Northern Virginia treating a single family house as a new development instead of redevelopment. So staff is seeking to treat the single family house development as a redevelopment rather than treating them as a new development. So based on the our code, if we treat them as a new development, the nutrient credits, the nutrient requirement for phosphorus is not going to be exceeding the 0.41 pound per year per acre threshold. So that is based on the new considering the single family house as a new development. So if we treat them as a redevelopment, the requirement will be changed into percentage instead of the 0.41 pound. So if we treat them as a redevelopment, we only reduce 10% of the phosphorus below the pre-development total phosphorus load. This is only from the existing impervious area, but if they are added the new impervious area, the new code will be applied only for the additional impervious areas. So the city uses all of this nutrient credit to meet our TMDL requirements set by DEQ. Every month we collect the nutrient reduction we made, nitrogen, phosphorus, and we submit to DEQ to meet our TMDL requirement. But recently in 2022, DEQ requested the city to calculate the nutrient load reduction for all single family homes redevelopment as of January 2019. So we develop a spreadsheet, calculate the existing for the single family house phosphorus requirement starting 2019. We submit the calculation to DEQ, and they were okay with the method we used using the redevelopment Virginia runoff reduction method. So we are asking council to treat the single family development as redevelopment instead of a new development. Can you go down, please? So this is a simple example just to show you the two different methods we use to calculate the phosphorus amount for a single family house using redevelopment and new development. So table 1 shows a new development nutrient load reduction calculation, and table 2 shows redevelopment nutrient load reduction. So there are two spreadsheets. The first one is new development Virginia runoff reduction. And the second one is redevelopment Virginia runoff reduction. So this is a single family grading plan. All of the three are the same. But if we see the total phosphorus reduction required for the new development higher than for total phosphorus reduction required for redevelopment. So we are asking them to meet a higher standard by asking them to use the new development. So if you see the total phosphorus achieved using the new development is way less than the total phosphorus reduction required. So in that case, to meet the new standard, what the development community do is go out and look for additional phosphorus from off-site nutrient banks to meet the 0.41 requirement. So in that case, we are putting a higher standard. And if they provide the additional phosphorus using the new development, it's just DEQ is not allowing us to use the additional phosphorus using the new development. So the second table is showing if we use the redevelopment for a single family house, so the total phosphorus reduction is already made by on-site stormwater management. So in that case, they don't have to go out and purchase additional off-site nutrient credit to meet the requirement. So we are asking council to consider this change for multiple reasons. The first one is DEQ is not allowing us the credit we are collecting from single family house using new development method. So if we change that, it will save monies for development communities and single family homeowners. Thank you. The second one we are asking council to consider is utilization of more appropriate local rainfall precipitation data or model or forecast developed on behalf of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So staff is seeking to add a language to utilize more appropriate local rainfall precipitation frequency data to integrate requirement of Section 35. So the language we are using here is directly came from DEQ in the resource protection area. We are not abandoning the NOAA Atlas 14. All of the Virginia, all of the Northern Virginia, they use a NOAA Atlas IDF curve to get their rainfall data. So the existing code uses NOAA Atlas. I know NOAA Atlas is using a very old data, and it's only historical data that NOAA is using to develop the IDF curve. So we believe it's outdated, and we are not the only jurisdiction working toward this. Finding another model that reflect the current climate change. It's other localities also working to use another precipitation data other than NOAA. So we are not abandoning NOAA, but we are asking to add additional language so that give us flexibility to use other forecasts that consider the future projection of the rainfall curve data. So staff is proposing to use projected intensity duration frequency curve. It's a common tool used by stormwater to design stormwater infrastructure designs. It's also prepared by NOAA, Mid-Atlantic Regional Integrated Science and Assessment Team. So the study is to support entities in the Chesapeake Bay watershed in Virginia to mitigate climate change challenges. The study developed a projected intensity duration curve. This is projecting in the future. It's not only like based on the historic data, but they are projecting forward. So this graph is showing two IDF curve. One is the existing NOAA, and the other one is the projected IDF curve prepared by Marisa. If you see the projected one, which is the blue line, is a little bit higher than the NOAA Atlas, which is the orange one. So if you see the orange curve for 10 is 24 hours, it's 4.8 inch. But the projected one, the new one proposed by Marisa is 5.53 inches. This is 24 hours, 10 years IDF curve. So this is projecting the future. So if we design stormwater infrastructure or stormwater management facilities, will be require a little bit more upsize, but in the long term, the city is planning, the city's issue, especially the flood, will be reduced by incorporating a future data into a rainfall curve. So finally, the impact of the update. With those updates, the city will be compliant with the state regulation. Given the cities, the city will be more, given the city more enforcement action to protect the resource protection area. The proposed change also clarify, reduce confusion on the city code. It will also lower the cost for homeowners, developer to meet the water quality requirements. In terms of time-wise, DEQ requested localities to adopt the code, the consolidated code change by July 1st, 2024, which is today, but city staff elected to combine the consolidated change with Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area change into a single set of the code update. So the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance update is supposed to go online next year. So instead of updating the two code in 2 different years, we prefer to do both in a single year instead of going this process 2 times next year. So based on DEQ request, DEQ requested notification, written notification from localities if we don't meet the deadline. And we sent written notification to DEQ notifying the new proposed timeline to update the code, and DEQ received the letter. So based on the schedule we submit to DEQ, the timeline we are proposing is first session today, Public Utility Commission planning to present to PUC on July 17, City Council first reading July 22nd, City Council public hearing and second reading on September 2024. With that, thank you so much for your time. If you have any question, it's time to ask. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Baheila. I know this is the first time you presented in front of City Council. This is certainly a very technical subject, so we appreciate you joining us tonight. Okay, questions and comments? Aaron?
I had a few. You're gonna have to bear with me because, as the mayor said, it's technical, and I wasn't sure I was following everything. In terms of the schedule, it looks like this is going out to Public Utilities Commission because of the soil, level issues or whatever, and the mature tree preservation. I'd ask if we can also refer this out to Urban Forestry Commission. I think it would make sense to do so, at least to get it to the chair. In terms of the RPA changes, do you have a sense of the number of affected properties? at all? It was hard to tell. It looked like that map, had the zoomed out parcels that showed where there would be affected properties, but I couldn't tell how many overall there were from the map, so that might be helpful information. On the nutrient,
So we don't have that information right now, but this change is only impacting the houses that will develop in the future in the RPA. So if they don't develop, if they are not adding, or if they are not disturbing any land disturbance, they are not going to be affected by this change until they like tear down and rebuild, or adding some additional structure in the RPA. But certainly we can provide that information to the council.
I guess I'm just wondering, how many properties are in the RPA, and we're often talking about, wanting to do more mature tree preservation, and that makes sense. But, when I think of something like, okay, and you may not have full redevelopment, but something like the accessory dwelling ordinance, like you could have a number of properties that could be affected. And so what does this now mean in terms of different rules that might apply there? How do we inform people of those different rules that may apply? And along the same lines, it wasn't clear to me how we necessarily track which properties are in the RPA. So if a person comes in for a permit at that point in time, is it already in the system where it triggers sort of these increased responsibilities that might be on that property owner because that parcel is already flagged as one that's subject to these increased requirements? So just in terms of system integration for how this actually comes together or applies, I wasn't sure if the systems are already integrated in that sort of way for whatever an updated code would apply. Ms. Hiscott shaking her head. She doesn't think so.
The lots that are in the RPA are identified, but when it kicks in, it's not integrated so that instantly it says if you disturb X amount of land, you're going to have to pay this amount of phosphorus credits to a phosphorus bank. That calculation is not done kind of pre-decision. It's not currently integrated.
Okay.
But if we're not doing phosphorus credits, which is another couple of my questions.
Yeah, I have that one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and continue to ask your questions, because it sounds like several of them will be mine. But
Okay. So yes.
Experience, it's not integrated.
Okay. Yeah. So then on the phosphorus credits, or these nutrient load credit purchases, I had noticed in the budget cycle in the CIP we had an out year that I didn't ask about at the time because it was a few years out, in terms of a $2.2 million debt-funded expenditure for a nutrient credit purchase. And at the time, I sort of said, in time when this comes up, I may ask sort of why we're doing the purchase versus maybe implementing, or will we be able to implement better green infrastructure to try to bring down the nutrient loads on site in the city, as opposed to paying to bring down those nutrient loads through these credit purchases. And so where this $2.2 million is already in here, I didn't know how that corresponds to, for example, moving from a new development model to a redevelopment model. Are we partially doing an end run around reductions that we should be trying to achieve by lessening the reductions required by going to a redevelopment model? I guess I would try to avoid doing the end run around getting the whatever it is, load reduced. So in line 140, for example, if you were under the new development, you'd have for 610 Park Avenue, 0.17 you'd have to reduce. But under redevelopment, you only have to reduce by 0.05, if I'm reading that correctly. So the 0.11, I get that we're reducing the cost to the developer or the landowner, the homeowner, but like, what would the 0.11, if we stayed under new development, you wouldn't be able to pay for the credit, so presumably to develop at that same rate, you would need to do more on site to actually get your phosphorus load or whatever it is reduced more than you're otherwise reducing it. So I guess I'm just trying to understand the practical impact of it.
I think Zach has his hand up. And,
Zach, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I think what you described is exactly how our code reads right now, and DEQ has been very specific with us that we are not allowed to do that. They have told us we cannot claim that extra credit for following the new development instead of the redevelopment, and that has actually hurt us in what our projections for the phosphorus and the nitrogen credits are. That is part of the reason why that $2-ish million CIP project is in there. But the code, the proposed changes to the code, I guess simply put, they highlight what DEQ will allow us to claim on any given project, which historically we've tried to get more and we're not allowed to.
I guess my question though goes to is DEQ basically capping what you can claim for the nutrient credit, because they're saying you need to do more on site than you're doing, so we're capping what you can get as a credit purchase. And like, is that the issue, or, right? So
no, I think their issue is more of a technical one, where new development assumes that it is in essence virgin ground, right? It's fully wooded. It generally, as a rule of thumb, has never been disturbed, or if it has been, it's been several decades of no disturbance. Redevelopment is more or less, minus maybe some of our parks. Redevelopment is what the city is, 100%. Again, minus our parks. Right, there is not a lot in town, whether it can be divided or not, that has not been maintained to some level that forces us to follow the redevelopment criteria. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we just don't have a whole lot of land that can meet the new development potential for the total credit reduction.
So I have a more basic question, and maybe I'm misunderstanding. Even though this calculation of whether we do new development versus redevelopment is under optional, you're telling us that we're being told we should really classify things as redevelopment, which is less stringent? Is that?
Yes.
So it's not really optional.
Well,
technically, no.
Is it only optional to the extent that there are no best management practices to actually achieve the required reductions on site that you ideally would need to achieve as new development? Like, I'm just getting, if we were to keep new development but we weren't allowed to get the credit purchase, would it mean that we just need to do a much better job on our development in terms of whatever practices exist to make sure that they're actually implemented on site to actually get the nutrient load reduced?
What DEQ has told us, and using specific examples that are on the screen, with 605 Knollwood, under our code as written right now, we would capture 0.2 pounds per year. Under the code that DEQ has told us that we have to use, we're capturing 0.1147. Pretty much what I guess what I'm trying to say is that that difference between 0.2 and 0.1147 is, I don't know, undue hardship would not be the correct term, but it is not, right, on paper we can show that under new development that, oh look, we've had this much reduction, but in reality the science, the engineering, and the policy of it is that is an incorrect number, right? That is a feel-good number, so to speak. The actual number that we are reducing is that 0.1147. So we as a city could choose to keep the code as it is, and I think to Mayor Hardy's point earlier, right, this is where it becomes optional. We as a city could choose to keep the code as is, and we would require that additional phosphorus to be purchased. But that is an unnecessary expense on developers. That is purchased through a credit bank, so we do not see that number actually occur in our streams and our runoff areas. Those occur miles and miles and miles outside of the city. In some cases, and to be frank, probably most cases, these credits can be purchased anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So they could be purchased downstream of the city, and we would see zero benefit in that case. So it to us, from a professional standpoint, it does not make sense to require the additional amount. The city's not seeing a benefit. It is kind of a phallus amount, so to speak, and that's why we're proposing the changes, is so that what we require matches what in reality we are seeing.
One follow-up point, Zach, or question. So if we were to hold the higher standard and keep it as new development, well, I know you said it's technically not feasible to even get to that requirement based on engineering and all the best practices. Do we think by holding a higher bar, we force the industry to go there without using nutrient credit purchases offsite?
No, I don't. Honestly, I don't think so. Right, like I said earlier, the idea behind the new development spreadsheet is, let's say you're out in Rappahannock County, right? Generally undeveloped, maybe farmland, but generally has never been disturbed. There's probably acres upon acres that have never seen any kind of tire or tracked vehicle on it whatsoever. That's what the new development spreadsheet is meant to be used for. That's how it's all kind of programmed in and coded. And we just don't have any technical backing to kind of force the industry to move that way on that.
Got it. Yeah, so I mean, I hear you that the actual reality is that we're only able to achieve that second column of numbers. But I think my personal heartburn is I just don't like the idea of reducing our requirements for stormwater, right? Like philosophically, that just doesn't feel great. Like we feel like we should raise the bar for what we require for stormwater. I'm hearing you say, but in reality, people aren't doing that. The only way we're getting to that is a fake number by getting credits, buying credits offsite.
Yes, and I appreciate where you're coming from. Absolutely, 100%. I think this is more of a almost a staff level thing, right? We're tracking two separate numbers for two very different things. One for DEQ and their goals, and another for what a development is and what they have to meet per code. So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to go down that road. But if I'm a developer, I think this is quite unfair that I'm being required to meet something that nowhere else in the state do I have to meet. There's no technical backing, right? There's no rationale behind it other than our code says so. And that would need to be discussed with Sally if we were to keep that.
And everyone in the region, at least our immediate neighbors, kind of in the developed area of Northern Virginia, uses redevelopment as the definition, or do they use development?
We are the only one in the entire state that has the code written the way we do right now.
That's helpful to know. Thank you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, did you have other ones?
No, I'll defer for now.
Okay.
If anything else comes to mind.
Just ask one clarification question. And then I think Mr. Steiner has his hand up too.
Why don't you go ahead, Deb, and then I'll get to Dave.
I just wanted to make sure I understand, in the ESC, we've talked about these NOAA charts quite extensively, like the lag between when they're established, when they're implemented, and by the time they're implemented, we already know that they're not up to date enough. So when I look at this, where's the page? Marissa, if I'm remembering that accurate, the IDF numbers. So we have the local authority to choose to use those. That's what we're saying here. I'm looking at Andy because I know you've participated in those lengthy discussions about which NOAA charts.
But I'll defer to Bahailu or Zach to answer your question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll take that one. So, and I might answer part of your question before you ask it, and I apologize for that. But to be succinct, yes, we do have the authority to pick a rainfall curve as long as it's applicable to the general area. So we can't pick something that was specifically designed for, say, Western Virginia. But if something is applicable to the region we're in, we can use it. What we found, right, we did research this. We did consider kind of modifying the language to allow for future changes and for policies to kind of take the place of code calling out something specific. DEQ did say that we needed to kind of call out something specific. They were very uneasy about leaving it vague. And some of the curves, or I guess all of the curves we found for this area, are too subjective to really use, right? So some have the interpretation of if a structure has a life of 50 years or less, or 50 years or more, right? Well, who's truly to say how long anything lasts? And I say that in the sense of we do have several houses in the city that are well over 100 years old. We have several houses in the city that probably haven't met the 50-year mark and are being torn down and rebuilt. So, right, it becomes very subjective. And to be frank, that we left it at NOAA 14 more from a liability and kind of interpretation standpoint. We didn't want somebody to come to council for every single development to argue of what criteria they met on what curve. And the NOAA 14 is still the current least subjective, so to speak, rainfall duration curve.
Okay, so the recommendation is to stay with NOAA Alice 14.
Mm-hmm.
Just making sure.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Other questions, Dave?
Madam Mayor, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
So I think a number of the questions I had have already been asked, but this is a lot for the community to absorb in 2 weeks. And frankly, so is the impact of allowing these changes under redevelopment versus development, does that mean that the city then has an obligation to pay for more nutrient credits than it otherwise would if we kept the current language? In other words, are we transferring costs from developers to the city?
The answer to that is no. The difference in those requirements you already see is DEQ only allows us to claim that lower number already. So there is no transfer of cost or anything like that.
Okay, so that's important. The second question I have is, we're speaking of single family, and yet there may be transition zones where we've allowed more development there. There may be townhouses, there may be 4x4s, there may be who knows what else. And then, of course, we'll be visiting the ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So does this really only apply to single family, or does it apply to development in these given areas? I'm trying to figure out what we're really saying about environmental impact. Are we only talking about single family here? Tell me a little bit more about the application of this to the types of occupancies in the affected properties.
Yeah, so Bahailu, feel free to jump in or raise your hand if I misspeak on anything. Outside of single family homes, all the other zoning is treated as redevelopment already. For whatever reason, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't know the history of when the code was developed, but for whatever reason, back when this code was adopted, single family homes in particular were picked out and called out that they should be treated as new development. We don't have any record as to why, the rationale, anything like that.
Okay.
But they were picked out kind of in particular, with everything else being able to follow the redevelopment.
So if there are requirements to meet new higher level nutrient level, if there are higher nutrient requirements and we're not requiring people that are building in those areas of whatever type, then how are those higher nutrient requirements going to be met? They're just not going to be met?
So they can be met, and I'll answer this question, and if there's follow-ups, I think I'll defer to Bahilu or the consultant. But the requirements can be met through a variety of different options, right? We have our stormwater projects that are ongoing, some of which have a higher nutrient credit reduction than others, right? Pipes don't generally get a whole lot, but fixing streams, removing pipes and putting in streams, daylighting them, get quite a few credits. So we have our projects. We have the ongoing development that when they follow the redevelopment spreadsheet, we can claim that level of credit. Those will continue to add to our current totals. If there is a difference in, I think it's 2 years, maybe 3, but 2 to 3 years, if there is a difference, the city would either have to kind of scramble to get a project in to meet the difference, or just credits from a credit bank. Right
Which
now,
gets back, right, I'm sorry, go ahead. My apologies, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. And right now we have the nutrient credit purchase in the CIP. We have that because up until 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, we were claiming that new development nutrient credit reduction. DEQ has kind of stripped us of that, made us recalculate to the redevelopment. So we've lost nutrient credits we thought we were eligible for that we are not. So that is in the CIP as a placeholder, as a worst case scenario fallback plan.
So the worst case scenario then is because we haven't required prior developments to provide nutrient credits, it's possible that the taxpayers are going to have to pay for that through a CIP budget. Again, worst case. It's often been said that development needs to pay for development and growth needs to pay for growth. I just want to make sure that's what we're doing here and not something else. So that's a concern, and a question. I mean, these are just questions at this point because this is admittedly very technical stuff, and we're still working through it. And then I am interested in differential impact on single family versus some of the other development that we've permitted now in T zones and commercial areas. So anyway, these are just questions at this point, but it'll be interesting to see if we're able to explain this to the community, get good input in time for a first reading on June 22, because I think you're hearing some initial questions from council members, not just me, on the impacts of this and why we're doing what we're doing, what are the technical issues as well as what are the legal issues, and then the longer term policy issues. So anyway, just questions at this point, but thanks a lot for the work that's been done.
Yeah, so we can certainly follow up with some comparisons on single family homes versus the T zones versus some of the commercial. I do want to correct one thing though. For as long as these standards have been around, all development has paid their fair share of the nutrient credit reduction, right? So the MS4 requirements of nutrient credit are not like the sewer system where a development comes online and you get X amount of usage and that needs to pay for itself. DEQ is trying to look back, right? So 30, 40 years ago, there was no nutrient credit, right? That program didn't exist. So even if a lot has been stagnant, right? If a house was built in the 1980s and it's still that exact same thing, DEQ's goals are centered around trying to make up for that lack of nutrient credit offset 40, 50 years ago. I know that's a little nebulous to understand, but that's where the goals come from. So the goals are always higher than what your actual expected development is. And I know that sounds very weird and very bizarre, but those goals are aggressive.
Well, I guess the fact that it's in our CIP suggests that that may not be the case. Anyway, I'm just asking questions, and I guess fundamentally a little bit of skepticism here. Are we having to put up these credits because the state's made a decision that farmlands are not paying an adequate amount in terms of controlling their runoff into the Chesapeake Bay? Anyway, just the question for why we are having this obligation, considering how little that we actually contribute. But in any event, that's what it is. And so those are just the initial questions that I have. I suspect I'll have more. And thanks a lot for your work.
I think the question about houses or what's in this protected area are important, because what's the overlay of single-family homes, commercial, T-zone, other types of residential that, you know, if you look at the chart that basically has like the aqua circles, they're all right against the stream, right? So anybody who's building in that going forward should bear the responsibility of the nutrient credits. And they're going to have to pay some, you know, presumably pay some portion. If what you're saying is that there's a look back now, the state is looking back 40 years and we're going to have to figure out how to accommodate it moving forward, then some portion or allocation of that should go to those developing within that, the BPA. Do I have that right acronym?
RPA, yeah, so just for so just for clarity, look back is my terminology. That's not a literal thing from DEQ. I guess what I was trying to communicate was that DEQ wants aggressive goals, right? The RPA, the Chesapeake Bay, we are part of an impaired water, and they are trying to get that back to a healthy water, right? Trying to undo all the damage over the last century and a half, whatever time period you want to talk about.
So
and as part of,
you're talking about look back for environmental quality. And I guess what I don't understand is why, if the nutrient credit, and I only have, you know, my own example, is passed on to the developer, the homeowner, why is the city, this is a super fundamental question. If it's always passed on, why does the city have $2.2 million in CIP? Why aren't we wouldn't we pass that on to whomever develops in those areas? And I feel like I'm missing something key here, but that's the fundamental question to me. Like, why don't we pass 100% of that through to whomever is building and causing the disturbance in the land, which is causing phosphorus to be leached into our water? Like, I'm missing something really fundamental here, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so I'll defer to Doug, who's with GKY. I think that's a fairly technical question that he can probably jump in on.
Thanks, Zach, and good evening, everyone. My name is Doug Fritz. I'm with GKY. I'm the consultant helping Public Works put these things together. The first of all, this is a really convoluted, confusing question we're dealing with both the development, with new development and redevelopment, and then what are the city's responsibilities as part of their MS4 permit. I think the first thing that may be helpful to understand is that when Zach said looking back, as an MS4 operator, DEQ has put into the permit that you have to meet a certain amount of pollutant reductions from existing development, and that was any development in place before July of 2009. So that reduction is really where that $2.2 million is going, is to meet those reductions. DEQ gave 3 permit cycles to get 100% of those reductions. So that is where the MS4 permit comes along and where those reductions are required. When we're talking about new and redevelopment, I believe, and Zach can correct me if I'm wrong, non-single family residents already utilize redevelopment if they were to come in and redevelop, and they would meet the required reduction using the redevelopment spreadsheet for VRRM. So that's one thing that's already taken care of. It's just that the single family residences that are at a standout. And that really becomes, if you looked at how the two different spreadsheets are used to calculate compliance, the first spreadsheet for new development, as Zach said, assumes that land was either forest or open space prior to development, not necessarily what the real land use was. When we use the redevelopment spreadsheet, there's the capability of introducing this is what the land use is, and therefore this is what we need to have it reduced by. So there is, I think Zach said that there was a theoretical reduction, that what is happening is folks are doing what they can on site, and that's also good for your local waters. But then their single family residents are required to go and buy more off of site. And DEQ has it, and I should say the regulations have it. If it's considered new development, you do not get to claim it towards meeting those existing reductions. But by saying that single family residents, you're going in and we're actually reducing what was in place, then you can apply that back towards your MS4 required development for existing development, if that makes sense, or if I've talked myself into a circle.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, those of us who are less technically oriented in terms of the differentiation between the, you know, the phosphorus reduction from one element to another, are still responsible for understanding that $2.2 million as a capital cost, and understanding why, you know, it's not either assessed to those properties. You said 2009 that there were changes made and we didn't collect all of that in those 3 permit cycles. And I may be misinterpreting what you said, but I guess I'm looking at the 2 components. One's environmental responsibility that we hold in Falls Church City, and then second is our fiduciary responsibility. So I'm
the
deferring on the
2009
technical
land
responsibility because I also am not a huge, I don't personally think that those phosphorus credits that are spent someplace in some bank benefit Falls Church City specifically. I'd rather figure out a way that, you know, if I had to pay $10,000 in phosphorus credits, that does something to support Falls Church City and ensures that Falls Church City's components of the streams are healthier. So that's one issue. And then the second is, you know, the only thing that I've seen is a complete 100% pass-through of that phosphorus credit to the homeowner or to the developer. So I still don't understand $2.2 million, and maybe I should take this offline to someone who can just walk me through some of the numbers better. And I don't want to waste everybody's time for something that I don't understand, but if I can't go explain that to somebody, I know I don't understand it well enough.
And I think
that's where I am.
Yeah, I think that's where I started too, I see this 2.2 million to the extent that we can do something that is actually on site dealing with this. And I know we have the green infrastructure, you know, initiatives as part of the environmental sustainability initiative. But, you know, I had a resident comment to me like, you can buy a lot of rain barrels for $2.2 million. So I don't know why we're, you know, paying $2.2 million for nutrient credit purchases. Like, are there things we could be doing and better practices we could be integrating to actually, you know, see those benefits, as Mrs. Scott's saying, locally, rather than just buying our way out of things that actually benefit us much more to integrate into, you know, responsibilities we have here.
I think a step before that I'd ask is, do we have the choice? I don't know whether, and this is a staff question, do we have the choice, or are we required to? I know it's worst case scenario, Zach said, but I guess I'd ask, do we have the choice first? And if we have the choice, is the choice only buying it or on-site green infrastructure things that we could do as a city?
So as an MS4, if we do not meet our nutrient reduction goals by that deadline, we do not have a choice. We have to meet those goals, I guess, is the short answer. There can be, when that day comes, that time comes, there can be a conversation of, oh, does this only get assessed on lots that have not had redevelopment since 2009, right? Because those lots that have been redeveloped since then have purchased, I guess in essence, their fair share of trying to make an impaired water better, right? Everything pre-2009 didn't have to purchase phosphorus, nitrogen, any other credits. So that conversation can happen at a later date. I think the important takeaway right now for council is that we do not have a choice. We as an MS4 are obligated to do our fair share. DEQ has goals that we have to meet, and that's considered kind of our fair share. So I know that probably doesn't make a whole lot of folks thrilled and overjoyed, but that's the reality of the situation.
Okay, Justine?
All of my questions have been asked except for one, and so the one remaining question, I was wondering about the resource protection areas. You know, they seem to follow along the streams, but it's not completely along the streams. It's broken segments. So is it broken up because what's in between is city-owned land, or why does it not completely follow the streams, whether it's Trips Run or Co-Branch?
Not all the streams are open channel. Many of them are actually piped, even though they appear to be streams on a map.
Gotcha. So as long as it's piped, then I guess the risk of excess minerals or whatever else going into the stream is reduced.
The phosphorus. Pipe.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That was all.
Dave, you have one more?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. So I think we're asking the questions back, which is, assuming that this obligation has to be met, who should meet it? Should it be the general population, or should it be the people doing the development? And then I would question the legality of a retroactive assessment for something that happened prior to 2009. And I'd want a legal review of that. That seems highly questionable, that if DEQ has permitted us to go this distance, to now retroactively say, oh, you need to look at what occurred before 2009. To me, that raises serious issues about administrative law and administrative procedures. So I guess I appreciate the work here, but I've got a lot of questions, and I don't know whether they can be answered by the 22nd. But anyway, I think we've gotten some initial answers, but I think you've heard similar questions raised by a number of council members that we need to work through this and have some clarity for the public in advance of the 22nd if we're going to stick with that calendar.
Yeah, and I'll agree. I just threw that out as a hypothetical discussion for that project when that time comes. There's administrative challenges on our end too of whether our records are complete or not. One thing that we have not mentioned tonight, DEQ's stance on this is actually that these ordinance changes are actually supposed to be done tonight. We have asked DEQ for an extension per the schedule that is in the staff report. So that kind of is DEQ's expectation, is that we're going to follow that extension. I can't remember the final adoption date. I think it was in September, maybe the 9th. So that has been communicated to DEQ and asking for an extension.
Let me just, Madam Mayor, so then the question is, why are we just getting this tonight? Anyway, I don't want to go into that. I want to move forward, but I think there are a number of questions that have been raised tonight for us to be able to describe effectively to the community what we're doing, why we're doing it, and it's the fairest way to do it. Thanks.
So a clarifying question. So this $2.2 million potential future CIP item, is that directly on critical path of this stormwater update?
No, totally, completely independent. That can be considered as a CIP project per the, I can't remember what fiscal year it was in as a CIP, but it can be considered as a CIP project for that fiscal year. That is completely and totally independent of what this is tonight.
Got it. So all the questions we asked around, like, do we have to pay it? And if we do, what are our choices? Do we have to pay it in terms of $2.2 million? Can we do other green infrastructure things? That we can take offline as part of that CIP item. For tonight, if I understand and read the staff report multiple times, there's 4 things. RPA changes to prevent removal of mature trees, which apply to RPA impacted parcels. Second change, climate change impacts and sea level rises, to incorporate those. Both of those, I'm understanding from the staff report, are required per DEQ. The third one, which is classifying single family redevelopment as redevelopment versus new development, was optional. Sounds not really optional given the reality of how we actually can get phosphorus reductions, right? And then the fourth one is using more local rainfall data and the various IDF curves staff showed us. Those are the four sets of changes that staff is asking us to incorporate and adopt by September 7th. Is that correct?
That is correct,
1
yes.
and 2 are mandatory, 3 is pseudo-mandatory, 4 is optional, but it sounds like it's a good idea because we want to use more local rainfall data. That's probably more accurate anyway. Is that a good synopsis?
Yes, I believe so. Bahilu, I'll pause and give you a chance to jump in if you have different thoughts, but I believe so, yes.
That's like the layman's term.
Yeah,
but I
that's
understood.
correct,
It's a really technical discussion. And so based on that, in order for us to feel good about a September 9th second reading and adoption, I guess the question I would have is, based on this new engagement model that we've talked about, of is this an inform, collaborate, et cetera, this feels like an inform. The question I would have for staff is, for each of these 4 components, who is impacted? For the RPA one seems most easy to understand because we know who the RPA parcels are. And so based on who's impacted, how do we communicate this to them? For items 2, 3, and 4, I guess it's probably harder to quantify who is impacted because they're just more nebulous. It's not as direct as parcel specific, right? So I guess the question is, staff, is for us to feel good about September 9th and the upcoming meetings, I guess I would ask you all to do some work in thinking about who is impacted, the right level of communication and engagement, so that we can decide whether that set of schedules and meetings is reasonable, right? That make sense? Because this was super technical, helpful. We can't go out to the community with this information. I think their heads will be swimming if our heads are swimming and we all read the staff report too. So I'd recommend that if we can break it out in those ways, maybe the RPA impacted ones are the easiest to understand. Like even if they're not redeveloping their home, right? Obviously it impacts what they could do with their parcel. I have a harder time understanding or thinking through who's impacted for 2, 3, and 4. It may just be the whole city.
Yeah, I think it's all property owners in the city are impacted by the others. The first 2 are strictly the people who own property in the RPA itself.
Okay.
And let me just, in terms of this connection between this code and the CIP, Zach or Bahilu, is it an accurate statement to say there's nothing we can do with this code that's going to reduce that CIP number?
That is correct. It's not the code that's going to reduce the CIP number. It's the number of projects that are either in development in the city or the number of projects that the city chooses to take on in its CIP. That's what's going to impact that number.
But in other words, the city couldn't adopt stricter phosphorus reduction requirements. DEQ won't let us do that and would not let us take credit for that against that CIP $2 million.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Dave, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I guess I'm not prepared tonight to accept that what we're doing is totally separate from the CIP. They relate to a mandate which isn't being or potentially won't be met by the people that are developing the properties, that then will have to be covered as a CIP event by everybody else. So I don't necessarily accept the divorce that is being suggested tonight between these two things. But anyway, we can discuss this more in the future. And I think the issues have been squarely presented tonight, and we've had a very good discussion. So anyway, thanks.
Okay, so one other, I guess, editorial note. If we do determine that inform is the right level of engagement with the community, I think you've heard from us, let's try to make this as easy to understand as possible, which may be a tall order since it's so technical, but if you can get back to us on what you think the recommendation is, I think then we can better absorb whether that schedule feels reasonable. I know that we communicated that schedule to DEQ, but we also want to make sure that people understand what this means. And great. Thank you all very much for this.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Bahilu. Zach, appreciate your work tonight.
And the next item then is authorization to participate in opioid-related settlement agreement with Kroger Company, and the city attorney is going to handle this item.
Thank you. The resolution before you would support the city's participation in a settlement of the latest opioid settlement agreement to come out from a national settlement effort through which the state of Virginia gets a proportionate share and the jurisdictions within the state get proportionate shares. Those shares haven't not been quantified, so I cannot explain like what those shares would look like, but this participation would increase Virginia's proportionate share because the more jurisdictions that participate, the more money you're entitled to, and it would allow the city to receive some funds. Yes?
Are there any downside? What are the downsides to participating?
Well, the downside is that if you had any intention to file a claim against this pharmaceutical company to recover damages that the city has incurred in dealing with the opioid crisis, you are foregoing that ability to file those claims against this company. You're waiving claims.
But to your knowledge, the likelihood of us doing that is much less than the likelihood of us receiving benefits from filing, presumably.
Yes, I would say yes. Because to file a claim, you have to individualize your impacts and figure out your specific liabilities and do the accounting for how your emergency responders have spent, you know, how much the opioid crisis has cost them. And it would be, I think, it would not be worth the money that it would cost to calculate all that is probably not worth the money you'd receive.
I believe other suits come up in the past, and I think we've always chosen to participate in the settlement.
I recommend participation.
I didn't see any reason why not to. Just thought I didn't want to overlook if there was. Thank you.
Questions? Okay, thanks for bringing it forward. Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. The question I think was asked, I wanted to just affirm on the record that the city attorney supports doing this. Is this affected in any way by the recent court decision regarding the manufacturers of the opioids, where I think the court refused to accept the bankruptcy settlement? Does that affect in any way this issue?
I have to say I don't know the answer to that. I am following the Attorney General of Virginia's guidance on this issue, and no communications have come forward to indicate that what you're discussing would affect this particular settlement. And their communications are pretty frequent. So I would be inclined to think that that lack of communication indicates that there is no impact.
Would you mind just checking up on that, just to make sure?
Yes.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other final questions or comments on this one for Sally? Okay. I think we're moving on to council schedule comments and other discussion items.
And Mayor, I don't know if this is a good time, if you want to raise the support letter request that we got from the Falls Church.
Yes, so there are two letters. So one that I circulated over email, which was supporting, I think, the Levine School of Music is seeking kind of like a nonprofit organization for capital support for their build out, which I circulated over email from you. And staff's made some revisions to that to remove the section for not stating this was on behalf of City Council given the short turnaround time that they had requested. The separate one is for the Falls Church Episcopal. They are seeking, again, grant funding to help restore and update the historic structure of the church. Dave, I don't know whether staff got you a copy of it, but we're looking at a hard copy here. So I want council to have both copies in advance before. Dave, do you have a copy of the church one?
Yeah, I did have two questions. I didn't see the Falls Church Episcopal letter, but that's okay. I can look at it later. With regard to Levine School, a little bit of history there. The Levine School has been looking for subsidies from the city for probably 20 years. And I guess they've sort of been proposed for a location up in the West End development. Has that been ratified by the city? Is it the developer has said that they want, or they agree that the Levine School will fill in the particular space? And is there any danger in regard to any of these two letters that if we support their efforts that they're going to come back and say, well, you supported it if it was from a third party, so if you thought it was such a good idea, then come up with city money? Just a question in both cases.
So they do have, the Levine School has signed a lease with Hoffman, and that has been executed. The city, of course, is not a party to their lease, but the city did have a requirement that there be these types of civic or art and community-oriented uses as part of the mix, and so that was a requirement in the special exceptional entitlements and in the site plan, and they have met that requirement through this attracting the Levine School to the site, and I don't know if the other co-tenancy is public yet as well. Do you?
I do not know if it's public, but it's part of the lease.
So they have another arts-oriented use that will be joining with the Levine School, and both will be sharing that space.
So we required the space, but had no approval authority over how the developer fills that space. Is that right?
There was not a specific approval step for the city council on that. The Levine School was named in the original submissions by Falls Church Gateway Partners back when they had their original proposal, and they have stuck with that, and that tenant has been discussed since the beginning, at least in terms of their submittals to the city.
Okay, but we never formally agreed to that. And what you're saying is that wasn't necessary under the circumstances, right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, with regard to taxation, presumably then, how much of that space is taxable or the occupancy taxable?
So it is all taxable space. And so there are no tax abatements for these civic or arts uses in the development.
Okay. And then finally, the specific request in front of us is for the city through the mayor to provide support for the Levine School seeking third-party funding for filling out the space. Is that what the request is?
Yes, the way I
Okay.
understand it.
Okay. The only concern I would have is that we be clear, and I think the letter, Madam Mayor, I think is relatively clear that we're not in any way suggesting that we're going to cover those costs. Okay.
I didn't read it that way. I think it was.
Okay.
Support getting funding from somebody else. I read it the opposite way.
Correct.
Hopefully, the more money they get from other places, the less likely they're going to ask
Yep.
us.
Yep. But I think it should be clear that at least the support for the letter is exactly what the letter says. It is not an implication that the city would cover those costs, or are we sort of expressing any kind of an intent along that line. So anyway, I just wanted to have this discussion on the record. Thanks.
And that is consistent, Mayor, with my conversation with Levine as we finalize the letter today.
Great. Okay. Any other comments or input? Okay. Okay. Okay, well, moving on. I also, while we were on other items, wanted to bring up bike meetings and the follow-ups. So first, I wanted to thank staff for holding those 3 community meetings the past 2 weeks. It was so hot for the last 2 of them, and really appreciate everyone being out in the community and engaging with the public. I think those are really tough meetings to have on the street, especially in that kind of weather, and I think all in all, I appreciate the effort put forward by staff. I think I was there for all 3, and I think some other members of council were there at least for 1 or more, so people should definitely jump in. But I heard a couple of takeaways, and I thought this would be a good time while it's fresh in our minds from those 3 meetings to talk about, like, here are the main themes I heard, and then check in with staff on what the next steps were. If that sounds like a good ad hoc item to talk about. So, number 1, thank you. From the first meeting, I think the east-west connection seemed like again, re-emphasize that, for me, that's really one that we should proceed with, because there aren't that many impacts to parking as proposed. And it seems like, assuming we can get the easements from the private property owners, it'll just be a popular thing to do, and it'd be nice to get a psychological win for biking in the community. So that reaffirmed my belief that that one should proceed green light, I think. Second, I think a general theme we've heard from the community, people like more proactive notice about having meetings in the neighborhood. And I think we've talked about maybe a potential GovOps item is, what's the right level of engagement, when and where and how, depending on impact. So that's probably a good thing we can take offline. But I think it was evident from the meetings we had in the neighborhoods, people heard about it in different ways, and we probably want to be more consistent and standardized in terms of what's the right way to notify people so they can come out and have an opportunity to engage. Third, I think the other main theme I heard from North and Southwest in particular is that while there was, people receptive to bikes, it was very evident that people want a comprehensive, complete streets plan for North and Southwest. People care about traffic calming, people care about pedestrians, some people care about bikes, but they want to see it as one holistic solution. And so while I think it was really admirable to go out and talk about bikes as part of the master bike plan update, we need to be prepared to talk about all those other components and present it as one solution before we go back and talk about specifics with those streets. Otherwise, I think we'll be disappointing people that we don't have answers on those other things yet. So those are my 3, I guess, major takeaways, and then a suggestion for GovOps to pick up the community engagement discussion at a future meeting. So would welcome other thoughts from people who are there.
That summarized my experience at the meetings very well. I would say in this case, over communication is better, and mailing people, and especially not just people on the street, but surrounding streets. So I'll stress that. But from everyone that I've talked to and talking to people during the community meetings after and before, I think a complete streets plan is what people in the community want to see. And so it's not just bike lanes. It is bike lanes, but it's bike lanes and crosswalks. And if we're removing, people were receptive to removing parking, but if we're removing parking, I need to have a way to get to my house. So I need a crosswalk to get from one side of the street to the other. And I guess the other thing is not just saying, no, we can't have raised crosswalks, and saying maybe there is a way, because that was something that a lot of community members wanted was, I guess, raised crosswalks and other things, but we're told no because it's a snow emergency route. And so, but down the street, you actually do have speed bumps and other things like that. So I guess rather than just automatically saying no, finding ways that we can actually work with the community to say yes, and that's all.
Yeah, I think on that point, being able to talk about it all together changes the conversation to ands versus ors, right? We're not trading off necessarily. I mean, there will be some trade-offs. I want to be realistic. There will be some trade-offs between parking spaces and bike lanes, but I think being able to say, we're doing this, and we're doing this, and we're doing this, just is a much easier conversation to have. But I did want to give kudos to Justine, because she put in so much personal time knocking on all the doors on North and Southwest. So thank you for doing more than is expected as a council member to try to reach everybody.
Well, that was one way of notifying everybody. But generally, I think at least the sense that I got is that people are supportive of these sorts of changes. Generally, I mean, there's you get everything under the sun, but generally, my sense is that people want to see change on these streets, It's just a matter of doing this holistically, comprehensively, and actually looking at all the different aspects of a street and not saying, oh, we're going to paint some bike lanes and that's the end of the day.
Cool. Other comments?
Yeah, you know, echo all of that. And I think what is really important is the process for communicating out after those 3 meetings. We have on the agenda, I think of September, a complete, you know, the bike master plan. I think we are going to create dissonant voices when that comes to the docket if we don't actually put out some communication, Wyatt, that addresses the concerns. People don't feel like they were heard when it comes from, you know, how traffic calming concerns were submitted 2 years ago. So I think that's one question, right? 2, when you take a look at the options presented for the bike, for kind of the bike lanes, what I think got lost, even though it was attempted to be verbalized, but what was missing in the written format was, why is it that the recommended option from staff is the recommended option? I think it got a little too much for folks to interpret, and I think it probably makes sense to issue something that explains the pros and cons there a little bit more. So the good news is that people were really hungry for information, right? And I think we just need to capitalize on that. It's not like people didn't care. I think people cared a lot. So I think what we do between now and September to re-engage is going to be really important to, you know, to make sure that it's heard, they're informed, and when we go into Bike Master Plan, that we are receptive to how that relates to multiple other things we're hearing. Great streets, right? It might not have to be, we just have to figure out how to cover it all, even though the Bike Master Plan might be just the Bike Master Plan.
Actually, following along on that point, I guess generally it would be helpful to have clarity about, because on the Tuesday night meeting for Northwest Street, the timeline wasn't clear, as in there's somebody that was asking, what are you voting on in September? And, you know, are we just voting on, there's the document, which is the Bike Master Plan, which could be similar, you know, similar to like the Tinner Hill plan or the, you know, we have all sorts of plans, but then to add in, you know, specific plans for Northwest and Southwest Street and the route to school seems like a lot to have all in one group together. And so maybe breaking those out, or if we do have them in, I don't know, it seems like a lot to have all in one plan. And so I guess some sort of clarity as to like what the vote is on in mid-September when this does come before us.
Any other thoughts? Dave?
Thanks. So Wyatt and I, after the first meeting at the West End Park, some citizens came out, and I think the comments on communication are very, very well taken and would help. And I'm trying to figure out, with regard to parking, what do bicyclists want? Do they want a lane on each side of the street? If you preserve some of the parking, there's a danger of somebody opening a door and hitting the bicyclist, versus a 2-lane bike path, if you will, on one side of the street, allowing parking on the other. So which of those design elements do bicyclists most prefer? It is a question that I had. And again, it doesn't have to be resolved tonight, but that's one of the questions I think that came out of that exchange we had with some of the neighbors.
I'll just give, at least from my sense, well, for the route to school, my understanding is that there wouldn't be much of it, because Offutt Street and those streets are neighborhood streets, so there wouldn't be much of any parking changes there or needed bike lanes there. But for north and southwest streets, there is a mix, so at least for people biking, a lot of people prefer the buffer, which would remove parking from both sides. What staff was recommending, though, which seemed palatable for the neighborhood, was keeping parking on one side of the street or the other, but then having a bike lane in both directions, but maybe not as buffered as some people would like to see.
Thank you.
Wyatt, is this helpful? Kind of just be able to summarize what we heard and.
No, I appreciate the summary, and I think these are all takeaways that we're processing right now. The question of complete streets is one we're going to have to wrestle with a little bit more, because this is just a bike plan. I mean, that's what it was advertised to be, and that's what we're prepared to deliver. And so how to handle some of these additional thoughts is something we're just going to think through a little bit. I think also thinking through the other routes where we didn't have the walking tours, where we do have some concepts, we need to think through how we're going to handle those streets. But our takeaway on the positive side was a lot of really good conversations happened on the street. We did take away the passion that people feel about their street, and we knew we would encounter that, but it is always good to engage. And that east-west street that has come out of this plan is really exciting. It is a potential, it's kind of opened up new ways of thinking about that pathway, and I think everyone's pretty excited about that.
Yeah. We do have an active NTC project, though, for Southwest and maybe even Northwest. And so I think the request is like, hey, we don't need a whole complete streets plan. We just want it integrated, and we want the two on one piece of paper so we understand how they might interplay and how we might make different choices on what the street segment looks like depending on what the recommendations are.
It's really, if you're going to get tactical, we just need to get back to people on Southwest Street. While we were attending that meeting, we had like 2 cars blow that stop sign.
While the chief was standing there.
While the chief was standing there. In fact, he actually
I live right there. I see it all
You know
yes,
it too.
it was that corner. So
Maybe we can deputize Phil Duncan.
Phil was smart to steer clear from the roadway, But the chief sat right there.
And that is one of the, well, not to go off on a tangent, but that is why traffic engineers are very leery of stop signs at locations where it's, for traffic calming purposes, because it can create a confusion. Well, at any rate, I won't get into all that. There are issues that people do want us to tackle on these streets, and that's the key takeaway.
So I guess as we're digesting all these takeaways, I guess when do we see this next? And when will it be in front of us again?
So I have not yet sort of sat down with staff on that process. I know it was laid out before, but sort of the thinking now, having had these engagements, so let me circle back with council and we'll get that communication out to council.
I mean, I think in light of all these takeaways, I think there's a desire from us to keep it going.
So that's our assumption, yes, that we're going to see this through.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you again for all the work on it.
Thank you.
Other miscellaneous topics? Justine?
I know we don't have a mayor's meeting this week. I was just looking at the schedule. I do know that the grading of Lincoln fell off of this week, but then I didn't see it on any other week. And so I'm wondering, are we going to get a chance to look at the grading of Lincoln?
Yes, we're going to definitely get that scheduled before we submit in that set of plans to VDOT. I think we will have a council discussion.
Okay.
Right now, we're working through some budget issues, but we will get back with council shortly. We'll have it scheduled very soon.
Okay.
I think it will occur in the month of July.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Debbie?
Following up on the the stop signs and people blowing through even while the chief was right there, and we've had, I don't have the data, just my sense is that we've had a little bit of an uptick in DUIs, and we know from commenters on Hillwood that we've had some significant incidents there as well. Kind of harkening back to the MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving years, almost feels like a campaign, is necessary because I don't know what we could have done differently other than assist in more of a regional campaign against drunk driving and maybe putting out our mobile signs on Hillwood for a while, either not just the traffic signs, but the written signs that, whatever not click it or ticket stuck in my head, but I know that there's one for not drinking as well. And maybe we need to do some more informational campaigns to at least address what we can.
Or both of the Hillwood ones, drunk drivers?
I believe there were at least 2 drunk driving incidents there.
There were crashes on the Roosevelt end of Hillwood in the past 3 weeks. Yeah. 2 cars have gotten totaled, just got hit at high speeds, parked cars.
And then, just reading the crime reports and I like that we've added the crash incidents, and so maybe that's just more of an awareness that I'm feeling like there's an increase, but, we can increase patrols, but we can also increase information, increase signage, and listen to our traffic engineers and their expertise on what else we can do to make these, intersections more safe. You can't really do anything about making that. There was no intersection in that most recent case. It was somebody who drove at high speed into a parked car. But that goes back to traffic engineering, whether you narrow streets or you add medians or you add bike lanes or, make it less of a wide boulevard. That kind of seems to lead to that. That said, we had an accident at MIT that had nothing to do with alcohol. It was just, a driving accident with somebody ending up in a yard on Saturday night at the same time this was happening. Yeah, so I just think that that's where we can step in and add some value as city council, is to encourage communication and encourage our traffic engineers, encourage the police to continue patrolling as they have been. I feel like maybe there's an uptick because they have been patrolling that more closely. I'm also surprised at how many people don't have driver's licenses. I don't know that. I feel like that has been, driving without a license has been a significant uptick in arrests there as well. And one of the comments, I believe, from one of the public comments was about noise. And I just wanted to refresh my memory. I believe that we cannot pull anybody over due to the sound of their vehicles. The sound of their vehicles are.
So that was adopted by the General Assembly, that you could not do that, and in fact, that you couldn't enforce it at all in the winter session of 2021.
Okay.
That has since been revisited, and you can cite on that.
Okay.
And, I'll confirm the latest on that, but that is a complaint we are getting more and more about loud pipes.
Okay. Anyway, that's enough.
Sure, Mary Beth?
This one's for Cindy, and you may know the answer to this already. At the VML Legislative Committee meeting, there was discussion of HB 1071, which is local authority regarding speed limits. It may only apply to towns and counties and not to cities, but for towns and counties that don't control their own roads, they have the authority to decrease speed limits in business and residential districts to below 25 miles per hour. So I haven't looked at what 1071 is.
Yeah, that was specifically to give towns and counties the same authority that cities got last year.
So it doesn't allow us to do, I was thinking the road that we don't control, maybe we could put it on there. Okay, thanks.
It was because those that had VDOT roads wanted the same authority.
Thanks.
But I think your question is, can we lower the speed limit to 20 miles per hour?
On our VDOT road.
On Broad Street and Washington Street.
Right.
And I believe the answer to that is we can.
Yes.
Yes.
So we couldn't before.
No, we
chose not to
could
before.
have last year. The traffic engineer's recommendation was, if you lower the speed just by a sign where the design of the road doesn't support that speed, it sort of just encourages lawlessness.
Right.
And so the thought was, as we do complete streets and we put in more measures to, particularly like the bigger streets like West Street and Hillwood, which are today 25 miles per hour, that if we do traffic calming so it appears like a 20 mile per hour street, then it would be at that point legitimate to lower the speed limit. That was the rationale.
I'm just wondering with this new news of more crashes, it might
Yeah.
make sense to look at that again.
Well, again, I think
But-
what we would look to is street design
Yeah,
first.
makes
And
sense.
then have the traffic speeds follow.
Yeah, when the plan came forward, it was specifically, those were zoned and left out for future because of street design.
29 is 35 miles an hour or 30?
So that is one that I remember promising to Councilmember Duncan that we were
Yes.
going to change that to 25 when we did the rest of the signs.
We even joked that you could save all the 25-mile signs and reuse them on.
Repurpose them. So I'll follow up on that. That was our intent, and
That would
might
make
not
sense
have
now, because if the
happened
county has the
contractually.
ability to go to 25, drop their speed limits as well, then it could be coordinated, right? Because obviously 29 spans from Arlington County, Falls Church, and then Fairfax County.
Yeah.
And so if there's interest to coordinate across jurisdictions in light of this new legislation, then it would
Yeah.
make.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that up. Do we have any
Thanks.
other scheduling things? Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, just to support what you just indicated, and I don't know whether we start the regional coordination at the staff level or whether it's NVRC or one of the transportation regional bodies, but we ought to be coordinating the reduction in speed limit if we can do it. And I do note that near City Hall, there's one road that's 25 and one road that's 20. So, also bringing everything down to 20 removes an element of confusion, I think, as well. Thanks.
Since we don't have a mayor's meeting on Wednesday, we do have Ask Cancel at 9 o'clock on Wednesday. Are there scheduling items we want to raise now? Otherwise, we're back together again on work session on the 15th.
I just see the July 19th Budget and Finance Committee meeting. That was been canceled, so that needs to come off the schedule.
Okay.
And Celeste mentioned that we can't make July 18th work as the dinner with Arlington Alexandria. Cannot.
And can I, scheduling wise, float an idea that we've been discussing with staff, which is that in lieu of having sort of the series of work sessions on the council strategic, or the initiatives aligned with the council strategic priorities, that instead we come back kind of one time with a reflection back on the comments that council made, and sort of reflect that back and have that conversation one more time. And then after that, we will provide regular reporting, and you'll see the substance of these initiatives coming before you when they're ready for action. It's a little different than what we talked about before. We talked before about having 5 work session discussions on each of the 5 areas. Instead, we'd have one night more to discuss all of them together. And we would propose to do that on July 15th.
What do people think about that?
Would we still get like, I don't even know what it is, but
The Gantt chart?
yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, so the Gantt chart is really just a good visual. So instead of trying to do it in your mind, are all these front-loaded or are they kind of spread out? And in fact, they are fairly front-loaded. When we do the Gantt chart, you'll see that. But yes, we will have that way of looking at it.
I mean, from my perspective, it seemed like what was already presented was fairly in line with a lot of what we were looking for. So rather than extending it out and taking up a lot more time, I would be in favor of having one session where we could sort of hammer out whatever additional details need to be hammered out and then move forward.
So we added like 3 to 5 things maybe on the list of 24, 25 things, right? So I guess in the work session, if you could just be clear with us, like, yes, we can commit to these now 30 things, and here's what the Gantt chart looks like. That's an important kind of action cycle to have, right? Like, here's what we propose, here's staff, council requested additional things for you to say, yes, we can do it, yes or no. I guess the second area is if we don't do those deep dives, are there any initiatives where scope is unclear? Or you need to understand like what exactly we're looking for? Like, I just want to make sure we have that conversation early so that we're on the same page about what this initiative means. Like, we don't want to think it's this limited in scope, and reality is actually going to be this much work. And
So when that's not clear, and let's take the solid waste initiative as an example. The scope is not yet fully set. So before we charge out and launch, we're going to have a scoping discussion with council, but that would be specific to that topic.
I think I'm fine with that otherwise. Okay.
Ask, the COG retreat is Friday and Saturday, 19th and 20th. Since it's my first one, does staff go and get invited to that? It's in Cambridge, Maryland.
Typically not.
You were on some committees, particularly finance, I think, COO related.
Staff, I think is generally, I have never been, so, and I've
Okay.
never had a specific invitation to go.
Huh. Okay. I'm looking at the tax abatement second reading for Virginia Village.
Yeah.
What's your confidence factor that that's gonna close and we can actually put that back on the docket?
So we have it on the docket right now for August,
Yeah,
and we'll have some briefings for the council. We're having pretty difficult conversations with Virginia Housing on this to
I
try to
heard.
get this through.
yeah.
So I'd like to keep it on the schedule and really try to keep it going, but I think we're worried about it.
Oh,
We'll know more at the end of this week.
yeah. Is there anything we can do to help?
So we'll talk, I don't think I have anything directly tonight, but we'll keep council informed on how things are going. The bottom line is that this is it always has been a little bit of a different type of financing for Virginia Housing. And so we feel like we've been very forthcoming on all the details, and they consistently have more questions. But that's what we're working through.
Okay.
Other scheduling items? Okay, you ready to adjourn then? Or 10 o'clock? Yeah.
That's okay.
It's okay then. It's okay. Okay. Let's be done. Good night all.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
It was new opening. And we stopped. Oh, got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, we were reading that. We end at 9:50, so that, yeah. Thank you.
It's one of those.
This is about the field and thinking about steps.